Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this episode, we're going to talk about code quality and trash talking about other people's code. There are three sides to this coin, if that's even possible. Anyway, we have the fact that your code sucks, their code sucks, and how to deal with knowing that your code sucks. We're going to start with a few points about finding out if your code sucks or not. So, your code sucks if people can't read it. Now, all code that you write should be easy to read. It should be well spaced, indented nicely. But above all, variables should be named correctly in an informative manner. Is your code covered in comments that explain what the code is doing? That means it sucks a bit as well. So your code really should be written in a way that is self-explanatory. Comments should be redundant in your code and reserved for those really complex edge cases where the code is complex and there isn't a simple way to do it, such as if you're using a really badly written third-party library or you're talking to some hardware that has some obscure way of communicating. But on the whole, just stop commenting your code. Now, your code sucks if it doesn't conform to your team standards, and the whole team's code sucks if it all doesn't look the same. So choosing a right way to write your code, underscore, prefixes, tabs over spaces, parentheses on the same line or the next line, it doesn't really matter. What matters is consistency. If you're new to the job, then copy the existing system style, even if you don't like it, but maybe suggest better ways of writing the code. Suggest that the next project that gets made, that you could possibly use your new ideas for writing the code and see how that works out. I worked in a team with 10 developers a little while ago, and we all wrote our code, at least at work, the same way. The seniors, the juniors, and everybody in between all followed the same basic patterns and rules. And when you would open a class or any project, you couldn't tell who'd written that code. You would look at it and it was all exactly the same, and you would know exactly what it was doing within seconds, rather than having to sit there and try and work out what the nuances of it were. So decide on a way to write your code. It doesn't have to be the way that you definitely want it. Come to some consensus between all of you as a team, but the key to it is to keep it consistent. So your code sucks if you have lots of duplication of code. So do you have copies of the same methods, copy and pasted everywhere? And you've got to remember when you're changing it in one place that you've got to go and change it in all the other millions of places that there are. And you've been caught in that situation where you missed one of them and the whole world came crashing down when you released it because you didn't test that bit, because you didn't remember that it used that bit of functionality that you changed. We've all done it. It's one of my biggest pet hates, duplication of code. It's up there with writing code for the sake of writing code. Do not duplicate code, ever. If you need to use it in multiple places, put it in a shared location, refactor your code and extract the methods that are going to be duplicated and put it into something else, something that can be shared, something simpler. Make your code a lot more elegant and a lot more easier to use. There's really no excuse for duplication of code. So that type of duplication is textual duplication, but functional duplication is even worse. This is where code isn't simply copied and pasted, but it's written again, but in a slightly different way. So I came across a problem with one of the systems in one of my previous roles, which was due to functional duplication. The system was a quoting engine. What it quoted doesn't really matter, but anyway, it had two front ends, two websites. Both could quote for the same product with the same attributes and values and everything, so it should give you the same result. Both front ends gave you different quotes, even though they used the same back end. Now, how is that even possible? They shared the same back end core code What's possibly gone on then? Well, the core back end only did half of the quote. There was business logic in the front ends. Oh no. That did some of the calculations, and because each of these front ends did some of the workings out itself, it did them slightly differently. So this was costing the company money, and quite a lot of it, really. In some cases, it was pence difference. Other times, it was pounds difference. And it was down to rounding at different times, at different places in the code. Now, it's unacceptable in any product. And from a development team, really, it shouldn't happen. So just make sure you don't become that team. Don't have your textual duplication. Don't have your functional duplication. So your code sucks if it doesn't work. Now, I'm not talking about it simply not compiling. All of our code doesn't compile at some point. But if it doesn't do exactly what it should do, maybe this means it doesn't deal with edge cases. Maybe it doesn't fail elegantly, or it just bombs out and destroys everything in its path. Maybe you haven't implemented any logging anywhere, so when things do go pear-shaped, that you've got no trail to follow. Without these basic steps, your code doesn't really technically work, because you've got no fail-safes in there. You're not 100% confident that whatever you throw at that code, that it will work. So that's something to think about. And how do you get around that? Well, your code sucks if it's not testable. And tests can help you with those problems that we just mentioned. Can you write, or did you write unit tests? I know I don't always write the unit tests that I should write, but I do try. If your code isn't provable with these unit tests, how do you know that it works? How can you be certain it does everything exactly as it should do? You don't. There's no way to know. So you can write your unit test to match the spec to do exactly what it says on there, and you can prove to anybody that comes and asks you if your code does what it should do by showing them the test. You know, they can follow them through, you can lead them through it, but it's proof that it works, not just sort of hit and hope on the screen. Now, the second part of this is their code. We've talked about your code and that your code sucks, but their code sucks as well. So these following points, keep them in mind. And when you come to slag off or trash talk about someone else's work, think back to this. You don't know the circumstances or the pressures that these people were under when they wrote that code. Maybe there weren't any requirements. Maybe the requirements changed constantly. Maybe the project came up days or hours before the deadline, or they changed just before the deadline. Could be anything like that. You don't know. You don't know. You weren't there. So, back off a little bit. You don't know how many hands have touched that code. Really? Do you? So you can't blame a single person. So it's worth remembering everyone approaches problems differently as well. They come at it with a different view on how to solve a problem. And just because the code isn't written how you would have written it, doesn't mean it's okay to trash talk about it, doesn't mean it's wrong. Now, I've done this in the past, and I think me sitting here talking about these sort of subjects, it's always good for me to admit to you listeners that I've done this. Us out here in podcast land that doing all these podcasts, we do come across as being, whiter than white, cleaner than clean with all our code, and we're not. So I hold my hands up that I've done that. It doesn't make it right. And to be honest, it just makes me sound like a whining fool, and it upsets people in the team, and it really isn't a way to be with teammates. You might not be saying that person is a bad programmer or that they should be sacked. After all, you're just talking about the code, but it's very easy for people to take it personally and get upset about it. You got to look at it from their point of view. And this does happen. I've seen it happen. And I've been at the other end of the stick too. So think about it before you speak. Do you want to be that guy or girl? Do you want to be the dick in the team that's slagging everyone else's work off? It can be fun sometimes, yeah, but it's not a great place to be. And for building team confidence and things, it doesn't really work. But the flip side of that, the other side to that situation is when people are slagging off your code, try to remember they're not talking about you. They're talking about the code. Try and step away from it, because it's not really a personal attack, even though it feels like it. So you hear comments like, this code's terrible. Who wrote this and what kind of drugs were they on? Because when they're slagging it off, they all talk in that voice. They're not really calling you out at that point. They're not really saying you're incompetent. What they're saying is the code that you write isn't up to scratch. And removing your personal feelings and your ego from that situation when handling the most brutal of code reviews or having your little baby completely pulverized by a teammate, it means that you're better equipped to handle it. You know, you can find out why your code sucks and what you can do to improve it by asking them questions. And treat the comments as a chance to learn and improve your development skills. When someone says, this code sucks, you ask, well, why? What's wrong with it? What makes you say that it's awful? You know, how can I improve it? What would you done? You know, instead of getting upset and taking offence and throwing something at them that's blunt and heavy, like a monitor or something, you know, asking that question, because you'd be surprised by the number of times that people think your code sucks, and it's because they don't understand the problem domain that they're looking at well enough. And when you explain why it's done a certain way, they might stand back and go, oh, all right, okay, fair enough. And it helps them understand. And you'll probably be very surprised how much you can actually learn from other people just by asking them how they would have done it differently to you. So if you are getting these problems where people are saying that your code's bad, you know, how do you go about fixing your code? You've noticed your code sucks and you've got all these problems that you want to fix, but where do you start, really? So I've got a 4-step approach that I like to put in, which is stop, lather, rinse and repeat. A bit like washing your hair, and if you're lucky enough to still have any. Step 1 is stop. Now, you found problems with your code and you're not happy with them. So these problems may have arisen from bugs being raised, or through code reviews, or people just looking at your code and going, oh, this is crap. The main point, and a good point, is that you know what those problems are and that they've been identified. So stop writing code, stop writing them in that way. Step 2 is to lather it up. Talk through the problems, really work them out. Make sure that you get really into those grubby bits and identify the issues. You can do this with more code reviews, with a colleague, or actually doing a code review if you haven't done one. If you work alone or you don't have the confidence in your teammates' opinions, seek out someone else's advice that you do trust. Talk over the problems with someone that you trust. Rubber duck it. Sit in a room with a rubber duck or other item and talk through the domain. Tell this duck, this is what I'm doing. This is why I've done it. And often you'll come to the answers yourself. And by going through these processes, that you'll get a better understanding of what you need to do and why it's a problem. So step 3 is rinse. Go wash that problem out. You know what the problem is or what the problems are. You talk through them with your team or your person that you talk to. So you know how to fix them. So go fix them. Get the unit tests in place. Make sure your code is neat and tidy. And 4 is repeat. Now, if you've got longer hair, sometimes you have to repeat this cycle. Do it again to get it really clean. So that lends itself to this analogy by going back to the person or the people that you spoke to. Show them what you've done. Do another code review maybe. Explain what you have done and why you have done it. And demonstrate you understand why the solution is what it is. So all of this leads up to the conclusion that your code sucks, my code sucks, their code sucks. All code sucks in some way, shape or form. So before you go slagging off someone else's code next time, give this episode a thought and put some of the points in this to practice, and maybe you'll save a little bit of face. And make sure to join us on the next episode where we talk to Joe Overline of Ugly Meter fame about his journey to becoming a developer and how you can succeed as one too. So thanks for listening to The Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and this episode was about code that sucks. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform and help The Cynical Developer to grow by increasing its audience. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website where you can find all the resource links and show notes for each episode.